I was 16 years old and sitting in my brother's truck with everything I owned in the bed behind me. $247 between us. No plan, no family willing to take us in. Just Barrett, me, and a choice that would change everything. I didn't know it yet, but that choice had red paint, 4 wheels, and an engine that hadn't run in 8 years. The morning started like any other Saturday in June, which is to say it started badly. Rick had been drinking since Thursday. I could smell the bourbon when I walked past the living room, could hear the ice cubes rattling in his glass at 7 in the morning. Barrett was already up, making coffee in the kitchen, his shoulders tight the way they got when he was trying to stay calm. We didn't speak. We'd learned that talking near Rick when he was like this only made things worse. But then his voice cut through the house, thick and slurred and mean. "Get out! Both of you! I'm done!" Barrett's hand froze on the coffee pot. I stopped breathing. Rick stumbled into the kitchen, still in yesterday's clothes, his eyes red and unfocused. "I raised you ungrateful little shits for 4 years. 4 years of my life wasted. Your mother's dead. I don't owe you anything. Pack your crap and get out of my house." I wanted to say that it wasn't his house, that Mom had owned it before she married him, that legally he probably couldn't just throw us out. But the truth was, I didn't know if any of that mattered. I didn't know anything, except that Barrett's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping under his skin, and that I needed to move before this got worse. We packed in silence. Everything we owned fit into Barrett's Ford Ranger, a 1998 model with rust eating through the wheel wells and 200,000 miles on the odometer. Clothes, some books, my toolbox that had belonged to Grandfather Ashford, Barrett's welding gloves, Mom's jewelry box that I couldn't bear to leave behind. It took us 45 minutes. Rick didn't come out to watch us leave. He'd already gone back to his bourbon. Barrett drove. I sat in the passenger seat and stared out the window at the flat Minnesota landscape rolling past. Endless fields of corn just starting to show green in the early summer heat. The sky was that pale, washed-out blue it gets in June, stretched thin over the horizon like it might tear. We'd been driving for maybe an hour when Barrett finally spoke. "Where do you want to go?" "I don't know." He nodded. His hands were steady on the wheel, but I could see the white around his knuckles. "We could try Aunt Linda." "She's not really our aunt, and she made it pretty clear at the funeral she didn't want anything to do with us." Barrett's throat worked. Yeah, the silence settled back in. I counted our money again, even though I'd already counted it 3 times. $247. Barrett had been saving for welding certification courses. I had money from working at the hardware store last summer. Combined, it was enough to maybe eat for a few weeks if we were careful. Not enough for rent anywhere. Not enough for much of anything. My hands were shaking. I pressed them flat against my thighs and tried to breathe steadily. Mom had been dead for 4 years. Cancer that ate through her so fast the doctors could barely keep up with it. And I'd thought the worst was over. I'd thought losing her was the hardest thing I'd ever face. I was wrong. Barrett kept driving. Rural Minnesota stretched out in every direction, farmland and forest, small towns that blinked past with grain elevators and Lutheran churches, and nothing that looked like hope. We passed through Millfield County around noon, and something about the landscape felt familiar, even though I'd never been there before. Barrett pulled over at a gas station. We split a sandwich and a bottle of water, because that was cheaper than buying 2 of anything. Neither of us talked about what we were going to do. Neither of us had any ideas. When we got back in the truck, Barrett just sat there with his hands on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead. "I'm sorry, Lo." He called me Lo, the way he had since I was little, when Marlo was too much for a toddler to manage. I'd always liked it. It felt like something that belonged just to us. "This isn't your fault. I should have—" "What?" I turned to look at him. "What could you have done? You're 18. You can't make Rick not be who he is." Barrett's jaw tightened again. "I just thought I don't know. I thought we'd have more time. Me too. He started the truck. I didn't ask where we were going. I don't think he knew. We drove down County Road 12, a 2-lane blacktop that cut through farmland in a straight line toward nothing in particular. The afternoon sun was hot through the windshield. I could feel sweat gathering at the back of my neck. My eyes felt gritty and tired, and I was starting to wonder if we'd just drive forever, burning through our gas money until the tank ran dry and we had to figure out what came next. That's when I saw it. A flash of red in a sea of green. Old red, faded and weathered, but unmistakable. "Barrett, stop." He glanced over at me. "What?" "Just stop, please." He pulled over onto the gravel shoulder. I was already climbing out before the truck came to a complete halt, my heart doing something strange in my chest that I couldn't name. The property sat maybe 50 yards off the road, down a dirt driveway that was more weeds than gravel. The farmhouse was sinking into itself, the porch roof sagging at an angle that made my stomach clench. The barn looked like a strong wind would knock it over. But in the yard, sitting in knee-high grass like it had been waiting, was a Farmall Model M tractor. The paint was sun-faded from bright red to something closer to pink. The tires were flat. Rust had eaten through the wheel wells and spread across the engine housing in rough patches. But the shape was right, the proportions familiar in a way that made my throat tight. Grandfather Ashford had owned a tractor just like this one. Barrett came up behind me. "Lo, what are you doing?" "Looking? At what? That's just junk." But it wasn't. I could see it wasn't, even from 50 yards away with the afternoon sun beating down and making everything shimmer. Tractors like this were built to last. Built solid and simple, with engines you could repair if you knew what you were doing. Grandfather had taught me that before he died, back when I was 5 years old and small enough to stand on the running board when he drove through his fields. There was a sign nailed to a fence post. "For sale, $200. $200. We had 247. I started walking toward the property before I could think better of it. Barrett called after me, but I didn't stop. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, like I was watching myself from a distance. The grass was dry and scratchy against my jeans. Grasshoppers jumped away from my feet in little arcs. The tractor was bigger up close, taller. The metal was warm under my hand when I touched the hood, heat radiating up from a full day in the sun. The paint was rough with age and weather. Someone had tried to take care of it once. You could see that in the way the seat had been reupholstered, in the careful arrangement of parts that were all still there, even if they didn't work anymore. There was a phone number on the sign. I pulled out my phone, one of those cheap prepaid ones that barely held a charge, and dialed before Barrett could tell me this was a stupid idea. An old man's voice answered. "Hello? I'm calling about the Farmall, the one for sale." A pause, then, "Still available, 200 cash. Does it run?" "Did when I parked it. That was 2014. Probably needs work now." "Why are you selling?" Another pause, longer this time. "I'm 82 years old, moving to an assisted living place in St. Cloud. Can't take a tractor with me." I looked at Barrett. He was standing a few feet away with his arms crossed, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. "I'm interested. Can I come see it?" "You're looking at it right now, aren't you?" "How did you—" "I can see you from my window, young lady. Little farmhouse across the road. You've been standing there for 5 minutes." I turned and squinted toward the house he'd indicated. A curtain moved in one of the windows. "Oh, come on over. I'll show you the paperwork." The man who answered the door was tall and thin, with white hair and hands that trembled slightly when he gestured us inside. Harold Whitmore. He moved slowly, carefully, like someone who'd learned not to trust his own body anymore. His house smelled like old coffee and dust and something medicinal I couldn't place. The living room was neat but sparse. Boxes stacked against one wall with labels written in shaky handwriting. Kitchen, bedroom, donate. "You're just kids," he said, settling into a worn recliner. "What do you want with a tractor?" "I don't know yet." The words came out before I could filter them. I think I need it." Harold studied me for a long moment. His eyes were pale blue, watery with age, but sharp. "You remind me of someone." "What's your last name?" "Ashford. Marlowe Ashford."
"This is my brother, Barrett."
"Ashford." Harold's expression shifted, something like recognition flickering across his face. Thomas Ashford's family. My throat went tight. That was my grandfather. "You knew him?" Everyone in Millfield County knew Tom Ashford. Best mechanic in 3 counties. He could fix anything. Harold pushed himself up from the chair and shuffled toward a bookshelf in the corner. When he came back, he was carrying a leather journal, the cover worn smooth with age and handling.
"This belonged to my father, Edgar Whitmore. He and your grandfather were close friends.
Bought their Farmalls together in 1952. Worked their farms side by side for 40 years. He held the journal out to me. I took it with hands that had started shaking. The leather was soft and warm, the pages yellowed and dense with handwriting. I opened to the first page and saw Edgar Whitmore and Thomas Ashford, partners, 1952. My grandfather had died when I was 6. I barely remembered him, just impressions of rough hands and the smell of motor oil, the patient way he'd let me stand on the running board of his tractor while he explained how engines worked. Mom never talked about him much after he was gone. Too painful, maybe. But here was proof he'd existed, proof he'd mattered to someone. "Your grandfather's Farmall is long gone," Harold said quietly. "Sold at estate sale after he passed. But mine's been sitting in that yard for 8 years. Been thinking I should sell it, but never could quite bring myself to." He looked at me steadily. Maybe I was waiting for the right person. Barrett shifted beside me. "Sir, we appreciate this, but we can't afford—" $200, Harold interrupted. "Same price I advertised. And the journal goes with it. My father would have wanted Tom's granddaughter to have it." I couldn't speak. My vision was blurring at the edges, and I realized, with distant embarrassment, that I was about to cry. Barrett's hand landed on my shoulder, steady and warm. "We'll take it," I managed. Harold smiled. "Good. Let me get you the title." The paperwork took 20 minutes. Harold insisted on doing it properly, transferring the title into my name, not Barrett's, mine, and making me sign in triplicate. He threw in a can of starting fluid and a few basic tools, things his father had kept with the tractor. When we were done, I counted out $200 in 20s and 10s and handed them over. Harold folded the bills carefully and tucked them into his shirt pocket. "You take care of that Farmall," he said, "and take care of yourself. Your grandfather would be proud of you." I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. We walked back to the property in silence. Barrett helped me hook up the tow chain so we could pull the Farmall back to somewhere. We still didn't have anywhere to go. But now we had a tractor and $47 and a dead man's journal. Barrett looked at me as we stood there in the weedy yard with the sun starting to sink toward the horizon. This was either the best decision we've ever made or the worst. "I know. Which do you think it is?" I touched the tractor's hood again, felt the warmth of the metal under my palm. "I think it's the only decision we could make." That night we slept in the truck bed, parked in a rest area off Highway 10. Barrett had laid out a tarp, and we used our clothes as pillows. The Farmall sat on its flat tires behind us, dark against the darker sky. I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling back to everything we'd lost, everything we didn't have. No home, no family, no plan. But I had Harold's journal in my hands, and in the dim light from the rest area lamps I could make out Edgar Whitmore's careful handwriting. The first few pages were maintenance logs, oil changes, tire repairs, belt replacements, dates and specifications written in the patient detail of someone who cared deeply about doing things right. Then, tucked between pages about a carburetor rebuild, I found letters. They were on yellowed paper, folded small and carefully preserved.
The first one was dated April 1952, addressed to Edgar from Thomas Ashford. Edgar, the Farmall arrived yesterday. Most beautiful piece of machinery I've ever owned. Started up on the second try, ran smooth as silk.
I took her through the South 40, and she handled like a dream. This was the right choice, partnering with you on these. Whatever comes, we'll face it with good equipment and good friendship. Your friend always, Tom. I had to stop reading because my eyes were blurring again. This was my grandfather's voice, preserved in ink, talking about the tractor that was now mine, talking about friendship and partnership and choosing good equipment. Barrett was asleep beside me, his breathing deep and even. The night air was cool and smelled like diesel and cut grass. Somewhere in the distance, a semi-truck downshifted on the highway. I kept reading. More letters scattered through the journal, notes about shared equipment purchases, about helping each other through harvest, about Tom Ashford teaching Edgar's son to weld, and Edgar teaching Tom's daughter to keep books. A 40-year friendship documented in margins and folded letters, and careful notations about who owed whom for parts and labor. The last letter was dated March 1989, just a few months before my grandfather died. Tom's handwriting was shakier, the letters larger and less controlled. Edgar, this damn hip isn't getting better. Doctor says surgery, but I'm not sure I've got it in me anymore. Been thinking about what matters. Not the farm, not the equipment. Those are just tools. What matters is the work we do and the people we do it with. You've been a good friend, better than I deserved. When I'm gone, you take care of that Farmall. It's seen us through good years and bad. Metal and friendship, both stronger when forged in fire. Tom. I closed the journal carefully and held it against my chest. The night felt enormous around me, full of possibility and terror in equal measure. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, high and wavering. My grandfather had owned a tractor like this one, had worked it until his body gave out, had believed that what mattered wasn't the tools but the work, not the equipment but the people. I didn't know what I was doing, didn't know how to start a tractor that hadn't run in 8 years, didn't know where Barrett and I would sleep tomorrow night, didn't know anything except that I was 16 and homeless and terrified. But I had this journal. I had my grandfather's words. I had a tractor that connected me to something bigger than my own small, desperate life. Barrett stirred beside me. You okay? I think so. He rolled over to look at me. In the dim light, his face was shadowed, but I could see the worry in his eyes. Lo, I need you to be honest with me. Do you actually think you can fix that thing? I don't know, but I think I have to try. Why? Because I struggled to find words for the feeling in my chest, the strange certainty that had grabbed me when I saw that flash of red in the field. Because it's the first thing that's felt right since Mom died. Because Grandfather loved these machines, and maybe some part of him led me here. Because we have nothing left to lose. Barrett was quiet for a long time. Then, okay, we'll try. I spent the next 2 days reading Edgar's journal from cover to cover, absorbing everything I could about the Farmall M. How it worked, what could go wrong, how to diagnose problems by sound and smell and the feel of the metal under your hands. Edgar wrote like a teacher, patient and thorough. He assumed his reader knew nothing, which was accurate for me. He explained that the Farmall M had a 4-cylinder engine, 36 horsepower, designed for general farm work. Simple by modern standards, but reliable if maintained properly. He'd drawn diagrams in the margins, labeled parts I'd never heard of, written notes about common failures and how to prevent them. On the morning of the 3rd day, I opened the manual to the section on starting procedures and began to work. Check the fuel. I opened the tank, rusty but not empty. The gasoline inside was old, thick, and dark, but there. It would have to do. Check the spark plugs. I didn't have the right wrench.
Barrett and I walked 6 miles into Millfield, found a hardware store that looked like it hadn't updated since 1975, and bought the cheapest spark plug wrench and a set of used plugs for $32. The man behind the counter, Brooks, his name tag said, looked at me curiously, but didn't ask questions. We walked back in the afternoon heat. My feet were blistering in my sneakers. Barrett carried the tools because his hands were bigger, steadier. I pulled the spark plugs one by one. They were fouled, crusted with carbon and oil, the gaps wrong. I cleaned them as best I could with a wire brush we'd borrowed from Brooks, then installed the new ones. Tightened them by feel, the way Edgar's note said to. Check the oil. The dipstick came out black and thick, the oil ancient and degraded. We'd bought a quart of the cheapest motor oil at the hardware store. I drained the old oil into an empty milk jug we'd found in a ditch. The drain plug was stubborn, and Barrett had to use pliers, and poured in the new. It wasn't enough for a full change, but it was what we could afford. Check the air filter, clogged with dirt and chaff and the dried remains of insects. I knocked it against the ground until dust clouds rose, then reinstalled it because we didn't have $47 for a new one. Barrett stood back and watched me work. His expression was unreadable.
You sure you know what you're doing?
No.
But you're doing it anyway.
Yes. He almost smiled.
You're braver than me.
I'm stupider than you.
Maybe. But I think Mom would be proud.
The words hit me sideways. I had to stop and breathe for a minute, my hands shaking on the wrench. Mom had died believing we'd be okay. That Rick would take care of us. That Barrett would graduate high school and get a good job. That I'd finish growing up in a stable home. She'd been wrong about all of it. But maybe she'd been right about something else. Maybe she'd been right that I had Grandfather Ashford's hands. His patience with machines, his refusal to accept that something was beyond fixing. I climbed up onto the tractor seat. The metal was hot from the sun, the vinyl cracked and split. My hands found the steering wheel, worn smooth by decades of use. I could almost feel my grandfather's hands there, overlapping with mine across time.
The starting procedure was simple, according to Edgar's notes.
Turn the fuel on, set the choke, turn the key to engage the magneto, pull the starter crank. We didn't have a key, but Harold had shown me how to jump the ignition, just 2 wires touching. I tried it. The engine turned over sluggishly, protesting 8 years of sitting idle. Nothing happened. Again, the engine coughed, died. Again, a sputter, black smoke from the exhaust. Silence. I adjusted the choke the way Edgar had diagrammed, pulled the starter again. This time, the engine caught for maybe 3 seconds, before dying with a shudder that rattled through the whole frame. Barrett was watching with his arms crossed. You're getting closer, or I'm breaking it worse. Keep trying. I did. 6 more times. 7. On the 12th attempt, I thought I heard something different in the sound, a rhythm trying to establish itself. I held my breath and adjusted the throttle fractionally. The engine caught. Held. The sound was rough and loud and beautiful, like thunder rolling across flat ground. Black smoke poured from the exhaust. The whole tractor vibrated under me. But it was running. I heard myself scream. Actually scream, high and sharp and full of something that felt like joy, mixed with relief, mixed with disbelief. Barrett was suddenly beside me, grabbing my arm, both of us laughing like idiots while the Farmall roared and smoked, and proved that broken things could be fixed if you were stubborn enough. The engine ran for maybe 90 seconds before I shut it down, afraid of damaging something. But 90 seconds was enough. 90 seconds was proof. "We can do this," Barrett said. His eyes were bright. I nodded because I couldn't speak. My whole body was shaking with adrenaline and exhaustion, and something bigger I didn't have a name for. That's when the green truck pulled up. She drove slowly, carefully,
parking on the shoulder about 20 yards from where we stood. The truck was old, but well maintained, a Ford F-250 with minor rust and clean windows. The woman who climbed out was thin and gray-haired, maybe 60, with a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile, but might remember if given reason.
She walked toward us without hurrying. Her boots were scuffed work boots, the kind you wore for actual labor. Her jeans were faded. Her flannel shirt was men's cut, but fit her like she'd been wearing that style for decades. She stopped about 10 feet away and looked at me. Really looked. Her gray eyes taking in my greasy hands and the tractor behind me, and Barrett standing protective at my shoulder. "You know what you're doing?" Her voice was flat, neither friendly nor hostile. "Just asking." "Learning," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "From that manual?" She nodded toward Edgar's journal, which sat open on the tractor seat. "And from memory. My grandfather." Her expression shifted slightly. Something that might have been interest. "Thomas Ashford." The shock of hearing his name again, from this stranger, made my heart jump. "You knew him?" Everyone in Millfield County knew Tom. Best mechanic around. She studied me for another long moment. "You're living here?" "Temporarily." Barrett's voice was careful, neutral. "I see." She did see, too. I could tell by the way her eyes moved from our truck to our meager belongings, to the desperation we couldn't quite hide. "I have a hay baler. Hydraulics failed. Repair shop can't get to it for 2 weeks. She waited. I understood this was a test. "I can try," I said. "Trying isn't fixing. Can you do it or not?" I thought about saying I wasn't sure, about hedging my bets, but something about her directness demanded honesty. "Yes, ma'am, I can." One corner of her mouth twitched. Might have been approval. "Blackwell Farm, 3 miles north on County Road 12. Be there tomorrow morning at 7. She turned and walked back to her truck without waiting for an answer. Barrett and I stood there watching her drive away. "What just happened?" Barrett asked. "I think we have a job." The next morning we were at Blackwell Farm at 6:45. The property was nothing like Harold Whitmore's abandoned place. The farmhouse was solid and well kept. White paint fresh. Porch swept clean. The barn was massive and straight, the kind that had been built right 100 years ago and maintained properly ever since. Fields stretched in every direction, already showing the green of growing crops. Vivian Blackwell came out of the barn when she heard our truck. She was wearing the same work clothes as yesterday, but her hair was pulled back in a neat braid. The baler's in the machine shed. She led us there without small talk. The shed was organized in a way that made my fingers itch to touch things. Tools on pegboards, parts labeled and sorted, a workbench clean enough to eat off. The hay baler sat in the center. It was massive, complex, a maze of moving parts and hydraulic lines. Vivian gestured to it. "Hydraulics failed 3 days ago. Everything else works fine." I walked around it slowly, trying to look like I knew what I was doing. The truth was, I'd never worked on a hay baler before. But hydraulic systems were hydraulic systems. Fluid under pressure moving pistons. The principles were the same whether it was a baler or a tractor. I found the problem in 20 minutes. A seal in the main cylinder had cracked, probably from age and temperature cycling. Hydraulic fluid had leaked out, and the system couldn't build pressure. "I can fix this. Do you have spare seals?" Vivian pointed to a parts cabinet. "Second drawer, organized by size." Of course they were. I found the seal I needed, still in its package, labeled and dated. Then I got to work. Barrett helped where I needed him, holding components while I removed bolts, catching hydraulic fluid in pans, lifting the heavy piston assembly when my arms weren't strong enough. But the diagnosis was mine. The work was mine. It took 6 hours. 6 hours of careful disassembly, cleaning, replacement, reassembly. Vivian came to check on me twice, but didn't hover. Just observed for a minute, then left.
When I was done, I filled the hydraulic reservoir with fresh fluid and started the baler. The sound was immediate and perfect. Pistons moving smoothly, pressure building, everything working the way it was designed to. Vivian came back when she heard it running. She tested the baler herself, running it through its full range of motion. Then she shut it down and looked at me. "You'll do," she said. It wasn't praise exactly, but coming from her it felt like it. She pulled an envelope from her pocket and handed it to me. I opened it and found $300 in 20s. "That's too much," I started to say. "It's the going rate." Vivian's voice was firm. "You did professional work? You get professional pay." I folded the money carefully and put it in my pocket. "Thank you, ma'am." Vivian studied both of us for a long moment. The silence stretched out. Then, "I have a bunkhouse, empty since my husband died. 2 beds, kitchen, bathroom. Needs cleaning, but it's sound." My heart was suddenly pounding. "Ma'am? You two can stay there. Conditions? Your brother works the farm 20 hours a week at $14 an hour. You enroll in school when it starts in September. No drinking, drugs, or trouble. You respect the property and each other." Barrett found his voice first. "Why would you do this?" Vivian's face went carefully blank. "Because your sister reminds me of someone. Because I have space going to waste. Because people helped me once, and I'm passing it forward." She looked at me. "Do we have a deal?" I couldn't speak. Couldn't process that someone was offering us shelter without wanting anything impossible in return. Barrett's hand landed on my shoulder, and I realized I was shaking. "Yes, ma'am," Barrett said quietly. "We have a deal." "One more thing." Advian's voice was softer now. "Your sister needs a legal guardian. Your stepfather can't just throw you out. You'll need to file for guardianship." Barrett's jaw tightened. "I don't know how." "I do." Vivian pulled out her phone. "I'll call Reverend Calloway. She'll know a lawyer who can help." 3 days later, we were sitting in Reverend Judith Calloway's office at Millfield Community Church. She was 56, with graying blonde hair and glasses that made her look both kind and shrewd. The lawyer she'd brought, pro bono, she emphasized, was young but competent. The process wasn't simple. Barrett had to prove he could provide for me, had to show stable income, stable housing, character references. Social services would investigate. A judge would have to approve. But Vivienne vouched for us. Reverend Judith vouched for us. Harold Whitmore sent a letter from his assisted living facility vouching for us. The court hearing was in August. I sat beside Barrett in a room that smelled like old wood and anxiety while a judge reviewed our case. The social worker who'd visited the bunkhouse testified that it was clean and safe. Vivian testified that Barrett was a good worker and I was enrolled for school. Reverend Judith testified about our character. The judge looked at me. "Do you want your brother to be your legal guardian?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because he's my family. He's kept us together when we could have fallen apart." The judge nodded slowly. "Temporary guardianship granted. We'll review in 6 months for permanent status." The next months passed in a blur of work and adjustment, and trying to build something resembling normal life. Barrett worked Vivian's farm and started learning everything he could about equipment maintenance. I worked beside him when I wasn't in school, soaking up knowledge about diesel engines and hydraulic systems and the million small things that kept a farm running. Vivian taught me without seeming to teach. She'd show me something once, then watch while I tried it myself. When I made mistakes, she didn't criticize, just showed me the right way again, patient as stone. I learned she was 61, that her husband Russell had died 2 years ago from a heart attack, sudden and final. That they'd had a daughter named Evelyn who died in a car accident 5 years before Russell, killed at 17 by a drunk driver who walked away with minor injuries. She didn't tell me these things directly. I learned them from Reverend Judith, from the photographs in Vivian's farmhouse, from the way she sometimes looked at me with an expression that was equal parts pain and something gentler.
One evening in late August, I found her in her workshop, sitting with the journal open in her lap. Russell's handwriting filled the pages. Notes about farm projects, equipment maintenance, ideas for improvements. His last entry was dated the week before he died. Projects for Evie when she graduates. Restore the tractor. Build a greenhouse. Teach her everything I know. Vivian looked up when she realized I was there. Her eyes were red. Sorry, didn't mean for you to see this. I stepped closer. Can I ask something? She nodded. Why did you help us? Really? Vivian closed the journal carefully. Because you remind me of what Evelyn could have been. Strong, capable, stubborn enough to fix a tractor you had no business fixing. She paused, and because I needed something to live for. Grief was killing me, slowly but surely. Then you showed up, covered in grease, trying to diagnose a hydraulic system you'd never seen before. She almost smiled. You gave me a reason to get out of bed. We sat in silence for a while. The workshop smelled like motor oil and sawdust, and the particular clean scent of metal. Outside, the August evening was fading toward dusk. Thank you, I said finally. For everything. Advian's hand, rough with calluses, covered mine. You're welcome. Now let's check that Farmall of yours. Engine sounded rough this morning. September came. School started. I walked into Millfield High as a junior, the new girl, the charity case living at the Blackwell farm. The gossip was immediate and cruel in the way teenage gossip always is, but I'd survived worse. I kept my head down and focused on grades. Ainsley Brooks, daughter of the hardware store owner, befriended me in October. She sat down at my lunch table without asking, pushed her glasses up her nose, and said, My dad says you fixed a hay baler in 6 hours. That's impressive. It took me a second to find my voice. Thanks. Want to join robotics club? We need someone who actually understands mechanics. I joined. Turned out, I was good at it. Ainsley and I built a small autonomous farming robot for a regional competition. We won second place. My grades were solid, not perfect, but good. Better than I'd managed when I was living with Rick, and spending all my energy just trying to survive each day. The winter was quiet. Barrett worked steadily for Vivian, learning equipment repair and farm management. I studied hard, spent weekends in Vivian's workshop learning to weld and rebuild carburetors. The Farmall sat in the barn, running perfectly, waiting. February came, cold and clear. The permanent guardianship hearing was scheduled for the 9th, exactly 6 months after the temporary order, and exactly my 17th birthday. We drove to the courthouse through fresh snow. Barrett wore the one button-down shirt he owned. I wore a dress Vivian had helped me find at a thrift store. Reverend Judith met us there, along with Vivian. The hearing was shorter than I expected. The judge reviewed Barrett's employment record, my school transcripts, character references from Vivian and Reverend Judith, and my teachers. The social worker testified that our living situation remained stable and appropriate. The judge looked at me one more time. You still want your brother as your guardian? More than anything, sir. He nodded and signed the papers. Permanent guardianship granted. Congratulations, Mr. Ashford. Take good care of your sister. We walked out of the courthouse into weak winter sunlight. Barrett's jaw was working the way it did when he was trying not to cry. I slipped my hand into his. We did it, I said. You did it. You're the one who made this work. We did it, I repeated firmly. Together. That evening, Vivian made dinner for the 3 of us. The first time she'd cooked for anyone besides herself since Russell died. Pot roast and mashed potatoes and green beans from her garden, canned last summer. Simple food, but it tasted like home. She brought out a cake, just a small one from the grocery store, but there were candles, 17 of them. Happy birthday, Marlo, she said quietly. I'd completely forgotten. In all the stress about the hearing, I'd forgotten that today was my birthday. 17 years old.
Officially, legally, Barrett's responsibility and no one else's. I started crying. Couldn't help it. Barrett put his arm around me. Vivian sat down across from us, and for just a moment, her hand touched mine across the table. "Make a wish," she said. I closed my eyes, thought about everything we'd lost and everything we'd found. Thought about a $200 tractor and a dead man's journal and a woman who'd taken us in for reasons I was only beginning to understand. I wished for more of this. More ordinary moments. More chances to prove we could build lives worth living. I blew out the candles. The smoke curled up toward the ceiling, thin and dissipating, carrying my wish with it into whatever future waited. Spring came to Millfield County the way it always did, slowly, grudgingly, mud season first before anything resembling warmth. March turned the roads to soup and the fields to swamps. Barrett came home every evening covered in dirt from helping Vivian prepare equipment for planting season. I spent my afternoons in her workshop, learning to rebuild carburetors and adjust valve clearances while rain drummed on the metal roof. Vivian taught the way Russell must have taught her, by doing, not explaining. She'd disassemble a fuel pump while I watched, her hands moving with the certainty of decades of practice. Then she'd reassemble it and hand me an identical pump. Now you. I made mistakes, constantly. Stripped bolts, dropped washers, into the dark guts of engines. Couldn't remember which gasket went where. She never scolded, just showed me again, her patience apparently infinite. One afternoon in late March, I was rebuilding a small engine, single cylinder, maybe 8 horsepower, nothing complicated, when I found something scratched into the workbench surface. Letters, worn smooth by years of use, but still legible. RB plus VM, 1987. Vivian noticed me staring. Russell carved that the week after we got married. This was his father's workbench. Has been in the Blackwell family for 3 generations. Were you always Vivian Blackwell? Her mouth twitched. I was Vivian Miller before. Gave up my name when I married. Regretted it later, but Russell was already gone by then. Changing it back felt like erasing him. She picked up a socket wrench and turned it over in her hands. We were married 38 years. Good years, mostly. He listened when I told him he was wrong about something. Not every man does that. I thought about asking what happened to Evelyn, their daughter, but the set of Vivian's shoulders warned me off. Some griefs were too raw to probe, even years later. Instead, I went back to the engine rebuild. Got the head gasket on correctly this time, torqued the bolts in the right sequence. When I test started it, the engine caught immediately and ran smooth. Vivian nodded once. Better. You're learning to feel when something's right. School was harder. Millfield High had maybe 400 students total, and everyone knew everyone's business. I was still the new girl, still the charity case, still strange enough to avoid. Ainsley helped. Her friendship gave me a foothold in the social landscape. But I spent most lunches in the library, studying or reading Edgar Whitmore's journal for the 1,000th time. My junior year robotics project consumed April and May. Ainsley and I designed an autonomous seed planter, using parts scavenged from old farm equipment and Arduino controllers we bought with prize money from the regional competition. The programming was Ainsley's domain, but the mechanical design was mine. We tested it in Vivian's North Field one Saturday in early May. The little robot, barely 2 feet long, running on old wheelchair motors, trundled along, dropping seeds at precise intervals. Not fast, not particularly efficient, but it worked. Ainsley was grinning behind her glasses. This is so cool. We should enter the state competition. We won't win, I pointed out. Schools from Minneapolis will have actual budgets. So? We built something real. That counts. She was right. We entered. Took 3rd place out of 37 teams. The judges particularly liked that we'd used reclaimed parts.
that our design could theoretically be replicated by small farmers without major investment.
On the drive home from the state competition, Ainsley asked, "You thinking about college?" The question landed awkwardly. I hadn't been thinking about college. College was for people who had futures mapped out, who could afford to plan years ahead. Maybe. "You should. You're smarter than half our class, and you actually know useful things." She adjusted her glasses. "I'm applying to University of Minnesota, engineering program." "That sounds expensive." "Scholarships exist." She glanced over at me. "You know you could do this, right? Study engineering, design farm equipment, make things that matter." The idea sat strange in my chest, foreign, but not entirely unwelcome. I'd never imagined myself as someone who went to college, who had a career, who built a life beyond simple survival. But maybe Ainsley was right. Maybe I could. I mentioned it to Vivian that evening. She was cooking dinner, something that happened more often now, like having people around had reminded her that meals were for sharing. "College." Her tone was neutral. "What would you study?" "Engineering. Agricultural engineering, maybe." She set down her knife and looked at me directly. "You thinking about it, or thinking you can't do it?" The question cut through all my evasions. "I don't know if I can afford it." "Scholarships exist." Vivian's voice was firm. "You've got grades, you've got skills, you've got a story that'll stand out on applications. Don't be stupid about this, Marlo. You're smart enough to do anything you want. But I can't leave you alone." Something flickered across her face. Pain, maybe. Or recognition. "I'm 61, not dead. And you're not staying here because I need you. You're going because you need to go." She turned back to chopping vegetables. The conversation was apparently over. But the seed had been planted. The Farmall ran beautifully through that summer. I drove it most evenings, just short trips around Vivian's property to keep the engine exercised and the fluid circulating. Barrett and I had replaced the tires in April, bought them used from a farmer liquidating equipment, and the old machine handled like it was decades younger. I loved those drives. The sun setting over flat Minnesota fields, the engine's steady rumble under me, the smell of turned earth and growing crops. For half an hour every evening, I could pretend I was my grandfather, working land that mattered, part of something larger than my own small life. Then December came, and everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning, cold enough that frost had turned the grass white and my breath fogged in the air. I'd started checking the Farmall regularly during winter, turning the engine over every few days to keep things from seizing, making sure fluids weren't freezing. I climbed up onto the seat, turned the key, pulled the starter. The sound was wrong immediately. Metal on metal, a shriek that made my teeth hurt. Clang! 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 Then nothing. The engine locked up completely, seized mid-stroke. I sat there with my hands frozen on the steering wheel, a sick feeling spreading through my stomach. That sound. I knew what it meant even before I climbed down and opened the hood. Vivian came out of the barn when she heard me calling, took one look at my face and came over without hurrying. "What happened? I think I broke it." She examined the engine with hands that knew what they were looking for, touched the block, listened to the silence where there should have been mechanical give. Tried to turn the crankshaft manually. It wouldn't budge. "Thrown rod," her voice was flat. "Connecting rod broke, punched through the cylinder wall. Engines seized. Can we fix it?" She was quiet for a long moment. "Technically, yes. You'd need to rebuild the whole engine. New rod, new piston, repair or replace the block, new bearings probably. Maybe $800 in parts, $1,200 in labor if you hire someone." The numbers hit me like physical blows. Barrett and I had savings, maybe $600 between us. Not nearly enough. I felt my throat closing up. This tractor had saved us, given us hope when we had nothing, connected me to my grandfather across years and death, and I'd killed it through negligence or stupidity, or just bad luck. Vivian's hand landed on my shoulder.
Come inside, let's think this through. But I couldn't think, could barely breathe. I walked back to the bunkhouse instead, shut myself in my room, and cried for the first time since Mom's funeral. Barrett found me an hour later. "Lo, talk to me." I broke the Farmall. The words came out thick, muffled. "It's ruined. Viv says it can be fixed. With money we don't have." I turned over to face him. "Maybe we should just sell it for parts, cut our losses." "Is that what you want?" I didn't know what I wanted. I wanted Mom back, wanted grandfather back, wanted to not be 17 and scared and so tired of everything being hard. Barrett sat down on the edge of my bed. "You remember what you told me the night we bought that tractor? You said it was the first thing that felt right since Mom died. That was before I broke it. Broken things can be fixed." He smiled slightly. "You taught me that. I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew it was evening, and someone was knocking on the bunkhouse door. Barrett answered, and I heard Vivienne's voice, quiet and serious. Then Barrett calling my name. I came out of my room feeling hollowed out. Vivienne was standing in our kitchen, still wearing her work coat, her gray hair escaping from its braid. "I have a proposal." Her voice left no room for argument. "We rebuild that engine. You, me, your brother when we need the muscle. I provide the workspace, the tools, the knowledge. You buy the parts as you can afford them. No rush. We'll do this in stages. Estimated time? 6 to 8 months. Why would you do that? Because. Vivian's eyes were steady on mine. Because Russell died before teaching Evelyn everything he wanted her to know. Because you're giving me the chance to finish what he started. Because teaching you matters to me. She pulled out a notebook and opened it to show me a parts list, costs itemized and totaled. $980, she'd written. Below that, payment plan possible. What do you need from us? Your time, your willingness to learn, your commitment to doing this right. She looked between me and Barrett. This isn't charity. You'll be working for this knowledge. But when we're done, you'll know how to rebuild an engine from the ground up. That's worth more than money. Barrett glanced at me. Your call, Lo. I thought about selling the Farmall, thought about giving up on something that seemed too hard, too expensive, too painful. Thought about my grandfather working this same engine 60 years ago, about Edgar Whitmore maintaining it with patient care, about all the hands that had touched this machine and believed it was worth preserving. When do we start? Vivian almost smiled. Tomorrow. Dress warm. Shop isn't heated. We started with disassembly. The Farmall sat in Vivian's workshop under bright LED lights, looking smaller somehow, more vulnerable. Vivian handed me a socket set and a notebook. Document everything. Photos, notes, diagrams. You take this apart, you need to remember how it goes back together. The first task was draining fluids. Oil, coolant, fuel, all of it contaminated now with metal shavings and breakdown products. Barrett helped me tip the tractor to get the last of the oil out, while Vivian supervised, correcting our angle when we started to stress the frame. Then we disconnected systems. Fuel lines, electrical wiring, throttle linkages. Each connection had to be labeled, photographed, noted. I filled pages in the notebook with sketches and measurements. Removing the hood took all 3 of us. The metal was heavy and awkward, decades of weather having fused some of the bolts. Vivian showed me how to apply penetrating oil and weight, how to use heat from a torch to expand the metal just enough. Patience, she kept saying. Force breaks things. Finesse fixes them. The radiator came off next, then the engine mounts. By the end of the first week, we had the engine separated from the tractor frame, sitting on a heavy-duty stand that Vivian had built for Russell's projects years ago. Now, the real work began. We pulled the head first, the top of the engine where the valves lived. 4 head bolts, each torqued to specifications written in Edgar Whitmore's journal. I loosened them in the sequence Vivian showed me,
working from the center outward to prevent warping. The head came off, and we all stared at the damage. The thrown rod had punched through cylinder number 3, leaving a jagged hole in the wall. The piston was destroyed, the connecting rod bent and useless. Metal shavings coated everything. Vivian whistled low. "That's ugly. Can we fix it?" "Yes, but it won't be cheap." She pointed to the cylinder wall. "We'll need to weld that hole, then bore all 4 cylinders to the next oversize. Machine shop work. Maybe $200 if we find someone good." I pulled out the parts list we'd been building, added cylinder boring to the growing total. Over Christmas break, we worked every day. School was out. Barrett had time off from his regular farm duties, and Vivian seemed content to spend hours in the cold workshop teaching us how engines lived and died. We pulled the crankshaft, a massive piece of forged steel that converted the up and down motion of pistons into rotation. It came out scored and damaged, the bearing surfaces roughened by metal-on-metal contact when the rod broke. "This needs grinding." Vivian ran her finger along one of the journals. "We take it to a machine shop. They'll resurface it. Clean it up to the next undersize, maybe $150. The expenses kept mounting. Every component we examined revealed new damage, new wear, new needs. The oil pump was full of metal shavings and would need rebuilding. The camshaft showed pitting on one lobe. All 4 pistons would need replacement. The bearings were shot. By January, we had a complete parts list, $980, just like Vivian had estimated. We had $600 in savings. That's when the community stepped in. Mr. Brooks at the hardware store heard about the rebuild from Ainsley. He called Vivian one evening and offered to front $200 worth of parts. "Pay me back when you can," he told her. No interest. Reverend Judith organized a fundraiser through the church. Nothing major, just an announcement in the bulletin that the Ashford kids were rebuilding a historic tractor and could use support. $150 appeared in small donations. 10 here, 20 there, from people I barely knew. The anonymous envelope showed up in our mailbox in early February. $100 in 20s. No note. Vivian went quiet when I showed it to her, and later I found a deposit slip in her desk drawer for exactly that amount. I never mentioned it. We had enough for the machine work. Vivian drove me to St. Cloud on a Saturday morning in late February. The machine shop was tucked into an industrial park, the building squat and functional. Inside, it smelled like cutting oil and hot metal. The machinist was maybe 70, white-haired and stooped. Walter Hoffman, according to the name embroidered on his coveralls. He examined our crankshaft and cylinder block with hands that had clearly done this work for decades. Tom Ashford's granddaughter? His eyes crinkled. Tom taught me precision back in '73. Brought in a diesel engine. Showed me how to measure bearing clearances to the 1,000th. Best lesson I ever got. My throat went tight. You knew him? Everyone knew Tom. Walter set down the crankshaft carefully. I'll do this right. For him. The work took 2 weeks. When we picked up the parts, Walter had done exactly what he promised. Welded and machined the cylinder wall back to true, bored all 4 cylinders to specifications, ground the crankshaft journals smooth and perfect. His invoice listed $380. Vivian pulled out her checkbook. Walter waved her off. $300. Tom's discount. Vivian's voice was firm. We pay what it's worth. You are. This is what it's worth to me. In the end, Vivian wrote a check for $300. Walter took it with a nod, then handed me a small box. Extra piston rings. You'll need them for the break-in period. No charge. March came and we started reassembly. This was where everything I'd learned mattered. The engine had to go together in perfect sequence, with perfect precision. 1/1000th of an inch error in bearing clearance could mean catastrophic failure. Vivian taught me to measure using feeler gauges, thin strips of metal calibrated to exact thicknesses. Install the bearing, torque the cap down, try to slide the feeler gauge between bearing and journal. If it fit too easily, the clearance was too large. If it wouldn't fit at all, too tight. I spent 2 hours getting the first main bearing right, Checked it, rechecked it, checked it again until Vivian finally said, "It's right. Trust your measurements." The crankshaft went in next, settling into its bearings with the weight of precision engineering. We torqued the main caps in sequence, checking clearances on each one. Then the camshaft, the oil pump, the timing gears that had to mesh exactly. Installing pistons was terrifying. Each one cost $70, and if I damaged one during installation, we'd have to buy another. The piston rings, thin bands of spring steel, had to be gapped perfectly and installed in the right order. Too much gap, and they'd leak compression. Too little, and they'd bind. Vivian showed me how to compress the rings with a special tool, how to guide the piston into the cylinder without letting the rings catch on the edge and break. My hands shook the first time. The piston slid in smooth and perfect, and I nearly cried with relief. 3 more pistons to go. I got better with each one. We worked through April and May, building the engine back up layer by layer. Connected the rods to the crankshaft, installed the head gasket, new from the parts we'd bought with community donations, torqued the head bolts in sequence, checking the torque 3 times because I didn't trust myself, connected the oil pump, the fuel system, the cooling system. Every connection had to be perfect, every gasket properly seated, every bolt torqued to specification. Ainsley came by one Saturday to see the progress. She stood in the doorway of the workshop, watching me adjust valve clearances with a wrench and feeler gauge. "This is insane." Her voice was awed. "You're building an engine." "Rebuilding?" I didn't look up from my measurements. Big difference. "Still. You're 17. You're building an engine." She had a point. 6 months ago, I wouldn't have believed I could do this. Now I was checking valve clearances to within 0.02 of an inch, my hands steady and certain. The last component was the oil pan. We sealed it with new gaskets and refilled the engine with fresh oil. 40 weight, the grade Edgar's journal specified. I poured it in slowly, watching the level rise on the dipstick. Vivian stepped back and looked at our work. The engine sat on its stand, clean and whole, every component new or rebuilt or machined back to specifications. 6 months of work, $980 in parts, hundreds of hours of learning and failing and trying again. "Ready to install it?" Vivian's voice was carefully neutral. We spent a full day getting the engine back into the Farmall's frame. The hoist creaked under the weight as we lowered the block into place. Barrett guided it, while I aligned the motor mounts. Everything had to line up perfectly, or we'd stress the frame. When the last mount bolt was tightened, I stepped back. The Farmall looked whole again. Almost normal. Like the last 6 months of work had never happened. Except now I knew every component intimately. Knew how each piece fit with every other piece. Knew the precision required, the care, the patience. It was late June. Almost exactly 1 year since we'd bought this machine. The evening was warm, the light golden, the air heavy with the smell of growing crops. Vivian, Barrett, and I stood in the yard looking at the Farmall. "Well," Vivian's voice was quiet. "Time to find out if we did it right." I climbed onto the seat. My hands found the controls automatically now: throttle, choke, starter. The engine had been primed, the fuel system bled, everything checked and double-checked. I turned the key. The first attempt produced nothing but a dry cough. My heart sank. Second attempt. The engine turned over sluggishly, caught for a second, died. Vivian called up, "Adjust the choke. Give it more fuel." I did. Third attempt. The engine caught, and this time it held. The sound was different from before, smoother, stronger, the rough edges worn away by new components and careful assembly. No smoke, no hesitation, just the clean rumble of 36 horsepower running exactly as designed. I sat there with my hands trembling on the wheel, listening to the engine I'd rebuilt from scattered parts and broken dreams. Barrett was grinning. Vivian was nodding slowly, her expression carefully controlled, but her eyes bright. Then, Vivian did something I'd never seen her do. She climbed up onto the Farmall and pressed something into my palm. Russell's wedding ring. Gold, simple, worn smooth by decades of wear. Russell wanted Evelyn to have this when she graduated, when she finished learning everything he had to teach her. Her voice cracked slightly. "You finished it, Marlowe. You learned everything I had to give. This belongs to you now." I couldn't speak, could barely see through the tears. The ring sat heavy in my palm, warm from Vivian's pocket, carrying the weight of everything she'd lost and everything we'd built together. Vivian climbed down without another word, walked back toward her house with her shoulders straight and her head high. Barrett touched my shoulder. "She loves you, you know, like a daughter." "I know." The words came out thick. "I love her too." We ran the engine for 20 minutes, letting it break in gradually, listening for any sounds that might indicate problems. Everything ran perfect, smooth and strong and exactly right. When I finally shut it down, the silence felt profound. We'd done it. Fixed what was broken. Proved that with enough time and care and community support, even catastrophic failure could be overcome. That summer, I started thinking seriously about college. Ainsley had sent applications to 6 schools. I had no idea where to even start. Vivian found me in the workshop one evening in July, reading through university websites on my phone. "You decided to apply?" "Thinking about it." "Good." She sat down on the workbench. "What's holding you back?" "Money. Fear. The feeling that I don't belong in places like that." Vivian's look was sharp. "You rebuilt a diesel engine. You know precision work that most engineers only study theoretically. You belong anywhere you choose to be." She pulled out a folder she'd been carrying. Inside were printouts, scholarship applications, financial aid forms, engineering program descriptions. "I've been researching. University of Minnesota has a good agricultural engineering program. Full scholarships available for students with demonstrated need and aptitude." "You researched this?" "I'm not dead yet. I can use Google." Over the next month, Vivian helped me navigate the application process. She reviewed my essays, pointing out where I was underselling myself. She drove me to campus visits, the University of Minnesota in the Twin Cities, Minnesota State, Iowa State. She sat through information sessions and asked pointed questions about support services for first-generation college students. Ainsley helped too. She'd already submitted her applications and walked me through the Common App System, the FAFSA forms, the CSS Profile Financial Aid application. The paperwork was overwhelming, but she made it manageable. My essay focused on the Farmall rebuild, how it taught me that engineering wasn't just about technical knowledge. It was about patience, precision, community, and the willingness to fix what seemed permanently broken. I wrote about my grandfather's journal, about Vivian's teaching, about learning that value came from work and care rather than money or status. I submitted applications in November of my senior year. 3 schools, University of Minnesota, Minnesota State, Iowa State, all for agricultural engineering programs. Then I waited. Senior year moved strangely. Part of me was still the girl who'd been homeless at 16, sleeping in truck beds and wondering where the next meal would come from. But another part was looking toward a future I'd never imagined. College, career, a life beyond simple survival. The tension between those selves made everything feel surreal. Classes were easy, almost boring. After rebuilding an engine to 1,000th-inch tolerances, calculus and chemistry felt straightforward. My GPA climbed to 3.98, 1 B+ in PE, dragging down an otherwise perfect record. I was elected co-captain of the robotics team. Ainsley and I designed a more sophisticated version of our seed planter, won the regional competition again, took second at state. College recruiters noticed. But mostly I spent time with Vivian, working on what she called our final project, restoring the Farmall to museum quality. We started in January, stripping every component we hadn't already replaced during the engine rebuild. Sandblasted the frame and repainted it in proper Farmall red. Rebuilt the hydraulic system completely. Reupholstered the seat in correct period vinyl. Replaced every worn fitting, every rusted bolt, every degraded seal. The work was meditative. We'd spend Saturday afternoons in the workshop with the winter light falling through dusty windows, working in companionable silence. Sometimes Vivian would tell me stories about Russell, about their marriage, about the farm they'd built together. Sometimes we just worked. One cold afternoon in February, she asked, "You scared about leaving?" Terrified. Good. Fear means it matters. What if I can't do it? What if I get there and I'm too far behind everyone else? Vivian set down the wrench she'd been holding. You think any of those other students can rebuild an engine? You think they understand how machines actually work? Not just the theory, but the practice? Probably not. Then you'll teach them. That's what engineers do. Share knowledge. Build on what came before. The college acceptance letters started arriving in March. Iowa State. Accepted. Merit scholarship, $15,000 per year. Still $12,000 short of full cost. Minnesota State. Accepted. Academic scholarship, $22,000 per year. Gap of $8,000. I was sitting in the bunkhouse kitchen when Barrett brought in the third letter. University of Minnesota, the return address said. I almost didn't open it, afraid of another gap I couldn't fill. Barrett sat down across from me. You going to look at it? I tore open the envelope, read the first line. Read it again because my brain refused to process the words. Dear Ms. Ashford, congratulations on your acceptance to the University of Minnesota College of Science and Engineering. The scholarship amount was listed lower down. Full academic scholarship, $38,000 per year, covering tuition, fees, and books, plus work-study eligibility for room and board expenses. I showed the letter to Barrett without speaking. He read it, then looked up with an expression I couldn't quite parse. You did it, Lo. We still need money for housing. We'll figure it out. His voice was certain. You're going. Vivian threw a small party when I told her. Just her, Barrett, me, and Reverend Judith. Cake from the grocery store and sparkling cider, sitting around Vivian's kitchen table like an actual family. I'm proud of you, Vivian said quietly. Russell would be too. I thought I'd cried all the tears I had over the past year. Apparently not. The housing money came together through community support. Reverend Judith organized another fundraiser. Mr. Brooks contributed. Several farmers Vivian worked with donated. Even Harold Whitmore sent a check from his assisted living facility, small but accompanied by a note that said, Tom would want this. Between the fundraising and my work-study eligibility, we had enough. Barely, but enough. April brought one more complication. I was working on the Farmall's final touches, polishing chrome, adjusting the governor, when an unfamiliar car pulled into Vivian's driveway. The man who got out was maybe 45, unshaven, unsteady on his feet, even from a distance. It took me a second to recognize him. Rick, my stepfather. The man who'd thrown us out almost 2 years ago. He walked toward me with the careful precision of someone who'd been drinking but was trying to hide it. Marlo, good to see you. I didn't move. My hands were tight on the wrench I'd been holding. What do you want? Just wanted to check on you kids. See how you're doing. His smile was wrong. Too wide. Heard you've been living here. That old woman taking advantage of you. Leave. Now that's no way to talk to family. I'm still your father. You're not my father. My voice came out flat and hard. You never were. You were Mom's mistake, and we were the price she paid for it. His expression shifted toward anger. I put a roof over your head for 4 years, and then you threw us out. We're better off without you. Rick took a step closer. I could smell the alcohol now, sour and pervasive. You ungrateful little... The screen door of Vivian's house slammed. She came down the porch steps carrying her shotgun, not pointing it, just carrying it casually at her side, like she was going bird hunting. You have 10 seconds to get off my property. Her voice was absolutely level. No anger, no fear, just cold certainty. Rick turned to look at her. This doesn't concern. 5 seconds.
You can't threaten. Vivian raised the shotgun slightly. 3 seconds. Rick backed toward his car, hands up. This is harassment. I could call the cops. Please do. Vivian's smile was sharp. I'd love to explain to them why a drunk man came onto my property to harass a minor. Rick got into his car and drove away fast enough to spray gravel. I stood there shaking, the wrench still clutched in my hand. Vivian came over and set the shotgun down carefully. You okay? I nodded because I didn't trust my voice. He's gone, and he won't be back. She touched my shoulder briefly. You're safe here, Marlo. Always. Senior year wound toward graduation. I was named valedictorian in early May. The announcement came during morning assembly, and I felt my face go hot while the whole school applauded. Ainsley hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. Vivian's only reaction when I told her was, obviously, you earned it. The speech terrified me. Standing in front of the whole school, the whole community, talking about what I'd learned and where I was going. But Vivian helped me write it, cutting through my tendency to downplay everything. Tell them about the tractor, she said. Tell them what you learned. Writing the speech took weeks. I went through draft after draft, trying to find the right words for everything I wanted to say about broken things and second chances, and communities that catch you when you fall. The finished Farmall sat in Vivian's barn, gleaming and perfect. We'd completed the restoration in early May, 74 years of wear and damage erased by careful work. A collector from Iowa had contacted us through Reverend Judith, heard about the project, wanted to offer $4,200. Vivian left the decision to me. It's your tractor. I thought about the money, about how $4,000 could cover my first year's housing and most of my second year, about how selling it would be the practical choice. Then I thought about my grandfather's hands on this same steering wheel, about Edgar Whitmore's patient maintenance notes, about 6 months of rebuilding with Vivian, learning precision and patience and the value of work done right. Some things aren't for sale. I looked at Vivian. This is family. It stays. She nodded, didn't smile, but something in her eyes warmed. Good. The week before graduation, Vivian asked me to help her with something in the barn. When I got there, she showed me a plaque she'd had made. In memory of Russell Blackwell, Evelyn Blackwell, and Thomas Ashford, engineers of life. We mounted it on the barn wall above where the Farmall sat. Vivian stood looking at it for a long moment, her hand resting on the tractor's hood. They'd be proud of this. Her voice was thick. Of you. I'm proud of you too, I said quietly. You taught me everything. No. Vivian turned to face me. You taught yourself. I just held the flashlight. We stood there in the dusty barn light, the Farmall gleaming between us like a promise kept. Graduation was Sunday, May 25th, 2025. I'd turned 18 in February. Almost exactly 3 years since we'd bought this machine for $200, and everything changed. The auditorium at Millfield High held maybe 500 people when packed, and today it was standing room only. Parents, grandparents, siblings, friends, the whole county seemed to have shown up for graduation. I sat in the front row in my white robe, sweating under the stage lights, trying to remember how to breathe. Ainsley sat beside me, similarly robed. She leaned over and whispered, "You're going to be amazing." I'm going to throw up. Do it after the speech. The principal was talking about our class, about futures and possibilities and all the standard graduation rhetoric. I stopped listening. My speech was folded in my pocket,
and I'd memorized it weeks ago, but suddenly every word had vanished from my mind. Then I heard my name. Marlowe Ashford, valedictorian, will now address the graduating class. My legs moved without my permission, carrying me to the podium. The microphone was too high. I adjusted it with shaking hands, looked out at the sea of faces, Barrett in the third row, Vivian beside him, Reverend Judith, Mr. Brooks. So many people who'd helped us survive. I pulled out my speech. The paper rattled slightly. I set it down and gripped the sides of the podium. 3 years ago, I was 16 years old and homeless. The words came out clearer than I expected, my voice carrying across the silent auditorium. My brother and I had $247, a truck full of everything we owned, and no idea what came next. Then I spent $200 on a broken tractor, a 1952 Farmall Model M that hadn't run in 8 years. I found Vivian's eyes in the audience. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Everyone would have said I was crazy. Maybe I was. But that tractor taught me something that changed my life. Broken things can be fixed. That includes us. My voice cracked slightly. I took a breath and kept going. Vivian Blackwell, you didn't have to help 2 kids you didn't know. But you did. You taught me more than how to rebuild an engine. You taught me that strength isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing it anyway. You taught me that women, we don't have to be perfect. We just have to refuse to quit. Vivian's hand came up to her face. I looked away before I started crying too. My grandmother died before I could know her. My mother died when I was 12. But you, Vivian, you showed me what it means to be a strong woman. To work with your hands, to think with your head, to lead with your heart. I turned to address the older women scattered through the audience. To every woman here, every grandmother, mother, aunt, sister, thank you. Thank you for paving roads we didn't know existed. Thank you for fixing things society said you couldn't fix. Thank you for refusing to accept that women don't do that. Because we do. We can. We will. The words were flowing now, easier. I'm going to the University of Minnesota to study agricultural engineering. I'm 18 years old. 3 years ago, I thought I'd be lucky to survive. Now, I'm going to build things, design things, fix things. And when people say, that's not possible, or you can't do that, I'll remember a $200 tractor that wasn't supposed to run. And I'll prove them wrong. I looked at my classmates, at Ainsley, grinning behind her tears. Class of 2025. We are not our circumstances. We are our choices. Choose to build. Choose to fix. Choose to believe broken things, broken people, can be made whole. The applause started before I finished the last word, building like thunder. The entire auditorium stood, parents, teachers, students, everyone on their feet. I saw Barrett crying openly, Reverend Judith pressing her hands to her mouth, Mr. Brooks wiping his eyes. Vivian sat very still, tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped tight in her lap. I walked back to my seat through that wall of sound, feeling like I was floating. Ainsley grabbed my hand and squeezed so hard my bones creaked. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. We walked across the stage one by one to receive diplomas. I took mine from Principal Henderson and shook his hand and barely registered what he was saying about proud and future and success. None of it felt real. After the ceremony, people swarmed us, parents congratulating, teachers hugging, classmates I barely knew wanting photos. Barrett found me in the chaos and pulled me into a hug that lifted me off my feet. You were perfect, Lo. Mom would have been so proud. Vivian approached more slowly. She stood in front of me for a moment, her eyes still red, then pulled me into an embrace. I felt her shaking. When she pulled back, her voice was rough. Russell would have loved you. Evelyn would have too. I couldn't speak, just held onto her hands. Reverend Judith appeared with a camera. Let me get a picture of you three. We posed, Vivian, Barrett, and me, in front of the school banner. Reverend Judith snapped the photo, and I thought, this is my family. Blood didn't make them mine. Choice did. Work did. The long, slow process of building trust and care and love did. Summer should have been simple. I had 3 months before college started in late August. The plan was to work, save money, spend time with Vivian and Barrett before everything changed. The plan lasted 6 days. I was weeding Vivian's garden on a Tuesday afternoon, hot June sun beating down, when I heard the crash from inside the house. Not loud, just the sound of something falling, something wrong. I ran. The screen door banged behind me. Vivian? She was in the kitchen, on the floor beside the table. Her eyes were open, but unfocused. Her right arm twisted at an odd angle beneath her. Viv! I dropped to my knees beside her. Can you hear me? Her mouth moved, but no words came out. The left side of her face seemed slack, wrong. Terror flooded through me, cold and sharp. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911. My voice somehow stayed steady as I gave the address, described what I was seeing. The dispatcher kept me on the line, walking me through what to do. Don't move her, check her breathing, keep her calm. Vivian's eyes found mine. She was trying to say something, her mouth working, but the sounds weren't right. It's okay. Help is coming. You're going to be okay. I didn't know if that was true. Didn't know anything except that the woman who'd saved my life was lying on her kitchen floor, unable to speak, and I was completely useless. The ambulance took 14 minutes. Longest 14 minutes of my life. I sat on the floor holding Vivian's hand, talking to her constantly, because the dispatcher said to keep her engaged. I told her about college plans, about the Farmall, about Barrett's welding business, anything to keep her eyes focused on me. The paramedics were efficient and kind. They asked questions, checked vitals, loaded Vivian onto a stretcher. One of them, a woman maybe 40, touched my shoulder. You did good, honey. You probably saved her life. Barrett met us at the hospital in St. Cloud. He'd been working a welding job 40 minutes away, but dropped everything when I called. We sat in the emergency waiting room on plastic chairs that squeaked and waited for someone to tell us something. A doctor finally came out around 7 that evening. Dr. Singh, her badge said. She was young, probably not much older than Barrett, but her eyes were steady. Ms. Blackwell had an ischemic stroke. A blood clot blocked an artery in her brain. We were able to give her medication to break up the clot, but there's been some damage. Right side weakness, speech difficulties. She'll need intensive rehabilitation. How long? Barrett's voice was tight. 3 to 6 months for significant recovery. Maybe longer for full function. She'll need someone with her during that time. The words hit me like physical blows. 3 to 6 months. College started in 10 weeks. Can we see her? Dr. Singh nodded. Follow me. Advian looked smaller in the hospital bed. Diminished somehow. An IV ran into her left hand. Monitors beeped quietly. Her eyes tracked us as we entered, but her right side lay still and unresponsive. I pulled a chair close and took her good hand. How are you feeling? She made a sound, frustrated, wordless. Her mouth moved like she was trying to shape words, but they wouldn't come. It's okay. You don't have to talk. I squeezed her fingers gently. You're going to get better. We'll figure this out. But I had no idea how. Vivian stayed in the hospital for 5 days. During that time, the reality of the situation crystallized into something hard and inescapable. She would need months of rehabilitation, Physical therapy for her right side, speech therapy for the language loss. She couldn't be alone, couldn't drive, couldn't manage the farm by herself. Barrett and I sat in the bunkhouse on Friday evening trying to solve an impossible equation. He had welding contracts lined up through September. Good money. Work that could turn into a real business. I had college starting August 15th. Vivian needed someone with her for months. I can defer. My voice was flat. Take a gap year. Enroll next fall instead. Barrett's jaw tightened. No, that's not happening. What choice do we have? Before Barrett could answer, his phone rang. Reverend Judith's name on the screen. He answered and listened for a long moment, his expression shifting. Then, "Thank you. Yes, I'll tell her." He hung up and looked at me. "The church is organizing a care rotation. 23 women have volunteered, mostly the older ladies, the ones Vivian's helped over the years. They'll cover 24/7 until she's stable enough to manage with less support." I felt my throat close up. Why would they do that? Because that's what communities do. Barrett's voice was gentle. Vivian's helped half this county at one point or another. Now it's their turn, but it wasn't enough. Care rotation could handle daytime, evenings, medical appointments, but the farm still needed managing. Equipment still needed maintenance. 100 small daily tasks that Vivian had handled alone for 2 years. "I'll postpone the welding contracts." Barrett cut off my protest before I could start. "You're going to college, Lo. That's not negotiable. I'll stay here, manage the farm, coordinate care. My business can wait."
"You've worked so hard for this."
"And you've worked harder." His voice was firm. "This is what family does. You go learn to be an engineer. I'll make sure Vivian's okay. When you come home for breaks, you can help. But you're not giving up your future." I wanted to argue, wanted to insist it wasn't fair that he always sacrificed for me. But the truth was, I desperately wanted to go to college, wanted the future we'd fought so hard to build. And Barrett was offering me a way to have it. I hugged him hard. "Thank you." We brought Vivian home from the hospital on Sunday. The bunkhouse wouldn't work, too many stairs, not set up for someone with mobility issues. Mrs. Thornton, one of the church volunteers, maybe 70 but spry, had already moved into Vivian's guest room. The downstairs bathroom had been fitted with grab bars. A walker waited by the front door. Vivian looked around her house with an expression of relief and frustration mixed together. She was using a cane, leaning heavily on her left side. Her speech was improving. She could say yes and no and a few other words, but complex sentences still defeated her. She saw me hovering anxiously and managed, "College. I'm going. Barrett's staying to help coordinate everything." Vivian's good hand came up and gripped mine. Her eyes were fierce. "You go. Promise." I promise. The night before I left for college orientation, I couldn't sleep, kept thinking about everything that could go wrong. Vivian having another stroke, Barrett getting overwhelmed, me failing out because I wasn't as smart as the other students. I went out to the barn around midnight. The Farmall sat gleaming under the single overhead light, perfect and finished. I climbed up onto the seat and just sat there in the silence, my hands on the steering wheel. This machine had saved me, given me purpose when I had nothing, connected me to my grandfather, to Edgar Whitmore, to Vivian and everything she'd taught me. Now I was leaving it behind. The barn door creaked. Vivian came in slowly, leaning on her cane, Mrs. Thornton behind her, looking concerned. Vivian waved her away. Mrs. Thornton hesitated, then went back inside. Vivian crossed to the Farmall, climbed up carefully, awkward with the cane at her weak right side, but determined. She settled onto the seat beside me. For a long moment we just sat there. Then Vivian's voice, slow and careful. "You're not leaving. You're going." The distinction felt important somehow. I nodded. "Bring me with you. She touched her temple, then her heart. Here. Here. I will. Every day. Vivian's good hand found mine. Proud of you. I leaned against her shoulder and cried. She held me as best she could, one-handed, and we sat on that tractor in the quiet barn until my tears ran dry.
College orientation started on a Thursday. Barrett drove me the 2.5 hours to Minneapolis, my belongings packed into the same truck bed that had held everything I owned 3 years ago. This time, there was more. Laptop Vivian had insisted on buying, toolbox with my name engraved, photos, books, the journal Edgar Whitmore had left me. The University of Minnesota campus was enormous. Brick buildings and green spaces and more people than I'd seen in my entire life. My dorm was Centennial Hall, room 412, 4th floor, no elevator. Barrett helped me carry everything up. My roommate was already there, Sloan, from a Minneapolis suburb I'd never heard of. She was friendly, in an effortless way I envied, chattering about her summer job and her boyfriend, and did I want the bed by the window? Sure. I started unpacking mechanically. Barrett left around 3. He hugged me in the parking lot, and I felt like I was 5 years old again, watching him leave for school while I stayed behind. Call me if you need anything. His voice was rough. I mean it, Lo. Anything. I will. Take care of Vivian. He nodded and drove away. I stood there until his truck disappeared, then went back up to my room. Sloan was decorating her side with photos and fairy lights. You okay? Just nervous. First time away from home? Something like that. I didn't tell her about being homeless at 16, about Vivian's stroke, about how every dollar of my scholarship had been fought for and earned. Didn't tell her I was terrified I didn't belong here. Instead, I set up my side of the room, put the toolbox on my desk, hung Edgar's journal on a hook by my bed, placed the photo of Vivian, Barrett, and me where I'd see it every morning. This was home now. I had to make it home. The first week of classes was overwhelming. Engineering fundamentals, calculus, chemistry, physics, technical writing. The workload was crushing, and we'd barely started. I'd sit in lectures with 200 other students and feel myself drowning in information. But then we got to the practical components. Building circuits, testing materials, designing simple mechanisms. That I understood. My hands knew what to do even when my brain was still catching up. One afternoon in the machine shop, a required orientation for engineering students, the teaching assistant was demonstrating proper lathe operation. Most students were watching politely, taking notes, not really comprehending. I found myself leaning forward, recognizing the principles from Vivienne's teaching. The TA noticed. You've used a lathe before? Some. Not this exact model, but the concepts are the same. Want to demonstrate? I took his place at the machine, set the speed, secured the workpiece, engaged the cutting tool. The metal spiraled away in perfect ribbons. When I finished, the part was within specifications, not just close, exact. The TA examined it. Where did you learn this? From a woman who learned it from her husband, who learned it from his father, who learned it from a man who was friends with my grandfather. That's a good lineage. Classes settled into a rhythm. I studied harder than I'd ever studied, spent hours in the library, joined study groups with 3 other women in my engineering cohort. Emma, Rachel, and Kayla. They called us the wrench women after I mentioned rebuilding an engine, and they thought it was hilarious. I called Vivian every Sunday evening. Her speech was improving week by week. By late September, she could hold actual conversations, though she sometimes struggled to find words. How's therapy? Her voice was slower than it used to be, but clearer. Exhausting, but good. I think I'm actually learning things. Good. Don't slack off. I won't. How are you? Tired? Frustrated? She paused. But better. Barrett's doing good. He's not working you too hard? He mothers me.
Like someone else. I know. I could hear the smile in her voice. October brought the first cold snap. I walked to class through falling leaves, my jacket inadequate for Minnesota autumn.
Called Barrett and asked him to send my winter coat.
How's Viv really doing? Really? She's struggling. Hates being dependent. Snaps at Mrs. Thornton. Cries when she thinks no one's watching. But her right hand is getting stronger. She can write again. Sort of. Tell her I miss her. Tell her yourself. She's right here. The phone rustled, then Vivian's voice. Marlo, how's school? Hard. Good. I'm taking Introduction to Agricultural Systems next semester. Russell would love that.
We talked for 20 minutes about classes and weather and nothing particularly important.
When we hung up, I felt steadier, more grounded. The letter from the engineering department arrived the first week of December. I almost threw it out, thinking it was spam. But the return address was official, so I opened it. Dear Ms. Ashford, we are pleased to offer you a position as an undergraduate research assistant in the Agricultural Engineering Historical Documentation Project.
The position includes a stipend of $800 per semester, plus academic credit. Your application essay about the Farmall restoration particularly impressed our selection committee.
I read it 3 times before it sank in. Research assistantship. Studying women in agricultural engineering. $800 per semester would cover most of my remaining expenses. I called Vivian immediately, not caring that it was Wednesday instead of Sunday. Guess what just happened?
Scholarship. Her voice was alert, interested.
Research position. Studying the history of women in agricultural engineering. They want to interview farmers, document old equipment, preserve knowledge before it's lost. Vivian was quiet for a moment. You'll interview me? If you'll let me. Her laugh was soft. Of course. But Marlo, I'm not an engineer. You rebuilt diesel engines. You run a 200-acre farm.
You taught me precision work that most engineers only study theoretically.
You're an engineer, Vivian. You just never had the degree. Another pause, then. When do you start? Spring semester, January 15th. Good. I'll have stories ready. Finals hit like a freight train. 3 weeks of studying, testing, papers, presentations. I lived in the library, survived on coffee and vending machine food, barely slept.
The wrench women and I quizzed each other endlessly, working through problem sets until the equations blurred together.
I passed everything. Not all A's, 1 B+ in chemistry, but my GPA was solid. Good enough to keep my scholarship, good enough to feel like I belonged. Winter break I spent in Millfield, helped Barrett with farm maintenance, worked on the Farmall, spent long afternoons with Vivienne planning the oral history project.
She'd been digging through old boxes, finding photos of Russell and their daughter Evelyn, letters from farmers Russell had helped, documentation of equipment repairs going back 40 years. This is good work. Vivian spread photos across her kitchen table. Preserving this. People forget how things were done. Then the knowledge dies. That's why it matters. She looked at me steadily. Your grandfather would be proud what you're doing. I'm just collecting stories. No. You're making sure we matter.
That our lives meant something. Spring semester started with a snowstorm that dumped 8 inches on Minneapolis. I trudged to my first research meeting through drifts up to my knees, wondering if I'd made a mistake accepting this position. Professor Hartley ran the project. She was maybe 50, grey hair pulled back, wearing practical clothes that reminded me of Vivian.
She gathered the 4 undergraduate research assistants, I was one,
and explained the scope. Agricultural engineering has been dominated by men in formal education, but the actual work of keeping farms running has always included women. We're documenting their contributions before that generation is gone. Over the next 4 months, I learned to conduct oral history interviews.
Started with Vivian.
Drove home one weekend with recording equipment and spent 6 hours listening to her talk about learning machinery repair from Russell, about running the farm alone after he died, about teaching me precision and patience. The interviews were treasure. Vivian describing her first time rebuilding a combine header, the frustration of being dismissed by parts suppliers who assumed she didn't know what she was talking about, the quiet satisfaction of proving them wrong when her repairs held and theirs failed. I interviewed Mrs. Thornton, too. Turned out she'd run her family's dairy farm for 40 years after her husband died young. Fixed tractors and milking equipment and plumbing, taught herself welding from library books. Mrs. Keller had been a mechanic during World War II when the men were overseas. Built aircraft engines, maintained military vehicles. After the war, she'd been expected to go back to being just a farm wife, but she'd kept fixing things anyway. Their stories wove together into a pattern I hadn't seen before. Women teaching themselves what they needed to know, passing knowledge to daughters who weren't supposed to need it, building competence in the shadows because the light wasn't available to them. I compiled everything into a formal report for Professor Hartley. She read it and called me into her office. "This is exceptional work, Marlowe. The level of detail, the way you've connected individual stories to broader trends. Have you considered graduate school? I'm a freshman, I know, but this kind of research ability is rare. Think about it." I didn't tell her that 3 years ago I'd been homeless, that graduate school felt like dreaming about Mars, theoretically possible, but practically absurd. But the seed was planted anyway. Finals came again in May. I was better prepared this time, more confident. The wrenchwomen and I had established solid study routines. I earned a 3.89 GPA for the semester. When grades posted, I called Vivian first. 3.89. Her voice was proud. "Good. Thanks to everything you taught me." "No, thanks to you working hard." Memorial Day weekend, I went home to Millfield. Barrett picked me up from the bus station. I'd sold my truck because parking at university cost more than it was worth. The farm looked different, greener, more alive. Barrett had planted the fields, maintained the equipment, kept everything running. Vivian was walking normally now, her speech almost completely recovered. "Wait until you see what we did." Vivian's eyes were bright with something like mischief. She led me to the barn. The door was closed, which was unusual. She opened it with a flourish. Inside, the barn had been transformed. The walls were freshly painted white, new lighting hung from the rafters, and the Farmall sat in the center on a custom-built display platform, surrounded by photos and documents telling its story. A plaque hung on the wall, "Blackwell Ashford Workshop, where broken things become whole." Vivian gestured to it. "Community fundraiser, plus insurance from storm damage. We rebuilt the barn properly." Storm damage? My heart jumped. When? Is everyone okay? "August, while you were at orientation. Bad thunderstorm. Took part of the roof." Vivian waved off my concern. "No one hurt, but it gave us excuse to renovate." Barrett appeared beside me. "The whole town helped. Took 3 weekends, but we got it done." I walked around the barn slowly, taking in the changes. The Farmall looked like it belonged in a museum. Professional lighting, information plaques, photos documenting the restoration process. Then I saw the second plaque, smaller, mounted beside the first. "In memory of Russell Blackwell, Evelyn Blackwell, and Thomas Ashford, engineers of life." The names of everyone who'd made this possible. Everyone who'd taught us that value came from work and care rather than credentials or status. Vivian came to stand beside me. "I have announcement." She pulled out a letter and handed it to me. Official letterhead from Millfield County Historical Society. "I'm donating the Farmall to the Historical Society. Permanent display in the new Agricultural Museum they're building." My hands tightened on the letter.
But it's yours.
It's ours. Vivian's voice was firm. Yours, mine, everyone who helped.
But it shouldn't sit in my barn. Other girls need to see what you built, need to know it's possible.
The tractor stays in Millfield, where people can see it and remember. Broken things can be fixed.
I understood then. This wasn't about the machine.
It was about the story the machine told. About 2 homeless kids and a broken tractor and a community that caught them when they fell. When do they want it? September, when the museum opens. We stood there in the renovated barn, surrounded by evidence of work done well. The Farmall gleamed under the lights, 74 years old and perfect. Sunday afternoon, Vivian organized a small ceremony. Just family and close friends. Barrett, me, Reverend Judith, Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, Ainsley, Mrs. Thornton, a few other church ladies who'd helped during Vivian's recovery. We gathered around the Farmall in the transformed barn. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, turning everything golden. Reverend Judith offered a blessing about preservation and legacy, and the ways we honor those who came before us. Mr. Brooks made a short speech about community and perseverance. His voice cracked when he talked about watching me come into his store 3 years ago, a scared kid buying spark plugs with money she couldn't afford to spend. Ainsley talked about how watching me rebuild the engine had inspired her to pursue mechanical engineering. She was headed to University of Minnesota in the fall. We'd be on campus together. Then Vivienne asked me to say something. I climbed up onto the Farmall seat one last time in this barn, looked out at the faces I'd come to love, found words I hadn't known I needed to say. I was 16 when I bought this tractor for $200. I thought it would save me. But tractors don't save people. People save people. My voice was steady now, certain. All of you saved me. Barrett, who never stopped believing we could build something better. Vivian, who taught me that strength means refusing to quit when everything says you should. Everyone in this community who caught us when we fell. I looked at Vivian. She was watching me with bright eyes, her good hand resting on Barrett's arm. This machine is 74 years old. It's survived because people cared enough to maintain it, repair it, pass it down. That's what we do for each other too. We maintain, we repair, we pass knowledge and care forward. I graduate in 3 years with an engineering degree. Someday I'll design farm equipment that makes work safer, easier, more sustainable. But I'll never forget that I learned engineering here. In this barn, with greasy hands and a patient teacher, fixing what everyone said was beyond repair. The distinction between fixing things and fixing people blurred somewhere along the way. We fixed this tractor together, and in doing that, we fixed each other too. Ainsley was crying. Mrs. Thornton was crying. Barrett had his arm around Vivian, who was blinking rapidly. Reverend Judith stepped forward. She'd been quiet until now, but her voice when she spoke carried the weight of pastoral care and community witness. I want to add something, if I may. She looked around at all of us. When Marlowe and Barrett first came to my office 3 years ago, they were 2 terrified children trying to keep their family together. The lawyer I found told me their case was difficult. The odds weren't good. She smiled. But I'd already seen Marlowe fix Vivian's hay baler. I'd heard about the Farmall, and I thought, anyone stubborn enough to fix a 70-year-old tractor will find a way to fix whatever's broken in their lives. Her voice grew stronger. This community doesn't just preserve old tractors. We preserve each other. We remember that everyone deserves a second chance, that broken things, broken people, have value and can be made whole. She placed her hand on the Farmall's hood. This machine will sit in the museum downtown. Children will see it and read Marlowe's story, and maybe some scared kid will learn what Marlowe learned. That you are not defined by how broken you are. You're defined by what you choose to build from the pieces.
The silence that followed felt sacred. Then Vivian spoke, her voice clear and strong in a way it hadn't been since the stroke. The museum opens September 15th. Opening ceremony at 2 o'clock. She looked at me. You'll come home for that? I'll be there. Later, after everyone had gone, I found Vivian in her workshop. She was sorting through Russell's old tools, organizing them into labeled boxes. What are you doing? Cataloguing. For the museum. Donation. She held up a vintage torque wrench. Russell's father gave him this in 1985. She set it down carefully and turned to face me. Marlowe, I need to tell you something. She gestured for me to sit. Her expression was serious but not sad. When Russell and Evelyn died, I wanted to die too. Not actively, but passively. Stopped caring if I woke up. Stopped maintaining anything. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Then you showed up, covered in grease, fixing a baler you'd never seen before. You needed teaching. I needed someone to teach. We saved each other. I reached for her hand. You're the best thing that ever happened to me. You and Barrett. You're the best thing that happened to me. Since Russell. She squeezed my fingers. I want you to know that. Whatever happens, you gave me my life back. Nothing's going to happen, I protested. We all die, eventually. Vivian's voice was practical, not morbid. But I'm not worried about that anymore. Because you'll remember. You'll pass it forward. That's all anyone can ask. We sat in the workshop as the evening light faded, surrounded by tools and memories and the smell of motor oil. Outside, I could hear Barrett talking to someone, probably Mr. Books, discussing welding techniques. This was family. Not perfect, not the family I was born into, but the family we'd built through work and care and refusing to quit when things got hard. The museum opened in September while I was back at school. Vivian sent photos, the Farmall in a place of honor, professional lighting, plaques telling the story of its restoration. A photo of me at 16, covered in grease, holding a wrench. Another of the three of us at graduation. The caption read, "The Farmall Girl. How one teenager's determination rebuilt a tractor and a life." Professor Hartley asked me to present my oral history research at an undergraduate symposium in October. I stood in front of 50 people and talked about women engineers who never had degrees, about knowledge passed through generations, about Vivian and Mrs. Thornton and Mrs. Keller, and all the women who'd built competence in the shadows. After the presentation, a woman approached. She was maybe 65, well-dressed, carrying herself with authority. Dr. Patricia Reeves, she introduced herself. Department head, agricultural engineering. Your research is remarkable. Have you thought about what you want to do after graduation? Not really. I'm only a sophomore. Let me know when you're ready to think about it. We could use someone who understands that engineering isn't just equations. It's people and stories and preserving what matters. She handed me her card and walked away. I stood there holding it, feeling like doors were opening I hadn't even known existed. That Sunday, I called Vivian, told her about the presentation, about Dr. Reeves, about graduate school possibilities I was starting to imagine. You'll do it. Vivian's voice was certain. You'll do whatever you choose to do. I'm scared. Good. Fear means it matters. She paused. Marlowe, you know, you're not broken anymore, right? The question landed heavy. I didn't know. Wasn't sure I'd ever stop feeling like the scared 16-year-old sleeping in a truck bed. You're whole. Vivian's voice was gentle but firm. Maybe not the same shape as before, but whole, strong, ready for whatever comes. I thought about the Farmall, about how we'd rebuilt it from broken parts, how it wasn't the same as it had been in 1952, but it was whole and functional and beautiful in its own way. Maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't broken anymore.
Just rebuilt. Just stronger for having survived the breaking. You taught me that, I told her. You taught me everything. No, you taught yourself. I just held the flashlight. The same thing she'd said in the barn after the engine rebuild. I smiled. You're a good teacher anyway. You're a better student. We talked for an hour about nothing important. Weather and classes and Barrett's welding business that was actually turning profitable. When we hung up, I felt settled, grounded, ready. I had 2.5 years left of undergraduate work, then maybe graduate school, then a career designing equipment that would help farmers work safely and efficiently. A life built on the foundation of a $200 tractor and a woman who'd taught me that broken things could be made whole through work and patience and refusing to quit. I sat at my desk in the dorm and looked at the photo of Vivienne, Barrett, and me at graduation, the Farmall visible in the background, gleaming and perfect. 3 people who'd chosen to be family, who'd built something real from nothing but determination and community support and the willingness to believe tomorrow could be better than today. The journal Edgar Whitmore had given me sat on my bookshelf. I pulled it down and opened to my grandfather's last letter. Metal and friendship, both stronger when forged in fire. We'd been forged in fire, all of us, and we'd come out stronger. I picked up my pen and started writing in the margins the way Edgar had. Notes about what I was learning, about engineering principles and human stories and the ways they intertwined. Someday, maybe someone would find this journal and read not just Edgar's words and my grandfather's letters, but mine too. Someday, maybe some scared kid would need to know that communities catch you when you fall. That women have always been engineers, even when the world didn't call them that. That choosing to build matters more than what you build with. I wrote until my hand cramped, filling margins with everything I'd learned. Then I closed the journal carefully and set it back on the shelf. Tomorrow, I had thermodynamics and materials science. Next week, a research meeting and an exam in fluid mechanics. Next month, Thanksgiving in Millfield with Vivian and Barrett and the family we'd built. And always, anchoring me to everything that mattered, the memory of a $200 tractor and the woman who'd taught me that fixing broken things was the most important work anyone could do. The Farmall still runs, 74 years old and strong, just like Vivian, just like the legacy we're building together.